Is it always going to feel like this?
I don't know how much more I can take.
Sometimes I can't even get out of bed in the morning. It's just too much.
Is this normal?
I can't be the only one.
Is it okay to not be okay?
Why can't I just change?
I just can't control my thoughts.
It feels like my thoughts control me.
I'm not smart enough.
I'm not wise enough.
I'm just not good enough.
I'm not enough.
Does anybody understand? Does anybody really see me?
Can anybody try and fix me?
There's gotta be an answer.
God, if you can hear me.
God, if you can hear me.
If you can hear me.
I need help.
Hey everybody, I'm Richie Fike, and this is the first of its kind. A guy after church said that we should call this and another thing, which I think is kind of funny. But I'm here with Elyse Jacobson and Rebecca Guzman. You've heard from Elyse during the sermon, but tell us again, Elyse, who you are and what you do.
I'm a licensed professional counselor and licensed addiction counselor. I've been in the mental health field for about 20 years. I have a heart for teenagers that are involved in the juvenile justice system. I also love working with people in private practice, addressing depression, trauma, anxiety, relational issues. And so I work in the forensic area, and then I also work at Heart Matters off of Northgate.
That's awesome, with our buddy Mike Pinkston.
Yes, Mike Pinkston.
I've known Mike for 20 years, 2002, 22 years.
Oh.
Isn't that wild? And he's the same. Like he's amazing. He's the same. All right. And Rebecca Guzman, tell us about you.
I am also a licensed professional counselor, licensed addictions counselor. I've been in the field for about 11 years. I work at a small private practice here in the Springs. I also work with youth involved in the legal system, as well as providing evaluations, mental health evaluations for people involved in the legal system, custody evaluations for families going through divorce. And I'm working on a doctorate in psychology.
Come on, way to go.
That's amazing.
Do you
One day we'll get there.
Are we going to have to call you Dr. Guzman?
I mean,
hello.
Once you make it to the other side of this much work and this much lack of sleep, I feel like, at least for a little while,
I know.
For a few weeks.
I'm in seminary getting a master's of theology, but I feel weird about people calling me Master Fike. That's strange. I don't think that's going to
Let's workshop that a little.
Yeah. That'll be bad for people's mental health. Okay, well, so we're in this sermon series called Your Brain in Your Bible. And today I just preached a sermon called The Face of God, where we talked about the right orbital prefrontal cortex. I've really gotten to the place where I can say that without like tripping up on any of the words.
Right off the tongue.
It took about 2 weeks. I was like the right frontal free orbital, but anyway, so I've gotten it now. And so watch that sermon if you haven't already. But I've brought Rebecca and Elyse on to talk about all the things that I got wrong, or all the things that I left out. I mean, I really, it's a short form format to preach a sermon. For most preachers, it's short. I find in order to make the argument, I end up having to make it about a certain length. And I am actually, in case you're curious, working on shortening my sermons because the mind can absorb what the butt can endure. Have you ever heard that?
Yes. No, I haven't heard it, but I like it.
Yeah, that's right. And our chairs are not super comfortable.
No.
Yeah. So if anybody out there wants to donate some chairs, we'll appreciate that too. But anyway, so you guys talk to the people about kind of what you heard me say and how it kind of fits or doesn't fit with what you do, and what did I miss? What did I leave out? What more needs to be said about the subject? You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll jump in on a couple of thoughts I had. I think you focused a lot on a specific part of the brain, and I think that's fantastic because you could definitely see your passion about that and how well it sets up the whole conversation that we're having. I also think the brain is very complex,
Yeah.
and I think
you think it is?
I do.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is God designed it that way.
Mm-hmm.
It is a complex organ.
Yeah.
And everything that's filtered through that one region then goes to every other region in the brain that then sends signals to every other part of our body. And that's God's design for how we are meant to operate. And that complexity, I think, is part of why the mental health field is so important, because there's no one answer to the complexity of how all of the ways that we develop can get off track.
Mm-hmm.
And so you mentioned some of the comments that can be made in the Christian world from people well-meaning and maybe not so well-meaning around mental health, and sometimes even the doubt around mental health diagnoses. Right. And I think the reality is, when we really understand the complexity of who God is and how he has designed us to be, it makes so much sense that our field looks at all of those little ways that things can get off track.
Mm-hmm.
And so to say those things are not real, or they don't exist, or this simple platitude, or let's quote a scripture or say one prayer will be the answer, I think that's missing the complexity of who our God is and who he's designed us to be in his image.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll tell you, the weight of the subject has been on me. I mean, there was a couple of times even today when I was teaching the sermon that I got emotional.
Yeah.
And I every Sunday morning I practice my sermons like in my little office by myself in the basement, and I like speak to one corner of the room.
Yeah.
And I didn't get emotional not one time this morning when I was practicing, but man, a couple of times today I started really thinking about the weight of the subject. And there's just a difference when you're practicing versus when you're executing a sermon, because the feelings, and I think the presence of God is overwhelmingly powerful in those moments. So, I mean, I have felt the weight of it and really want to do a good job of talking about this in a way that, like I said in the sermon, equips believers to have more empathy for people. If we know that our God is acquainted with grief and with the troubles of this world, then why wouldn't we be if we're going to be like him? So, what would you say, Elyse, based on what you heard today and what we've talked about over these last 3 or 4 weeks together? What stood out to you in the sermon as incomplete, or as, man, that's right on? I'll take some affirmation too. I can receive some of that.
I appreciate it. I mean, I was in graduate school in 2000 and to 2003, and just what our field has learned around attachment and around trauma and what's going on in the brain, it's exploded in the last 2 decades. And so I love that you started with attachment and what happens in the brain and how we are so relational.
Yeah.
I think we've always known God is a relational God. And a lot of times God uses his relationship with us and our relationship with others to heal. And so I like that you started with the brain and attachment. I do think mental health is very complex, and so I think that is, I'm glad that you have met with people in the mental health field, that you're asking for us to come in and talk. And I love, from what it looks like, that you'll be having people speak also from our congregation about their strengths and struggles. And I think that's all I have to say right now.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's a fellow that talked to me. I met him a few weeks ago when we led worship at Rocky Mountain Calvary.
Yeah.
And they live in Monument. And so they were like, we're driving all the way to Rocky Mountain Calvary. And so anyway, they were here today. Sorry, Eric, if you're watching this. But he said that he's a licensed professional counselor. And I didn't know that about this guy.
Yeah.
And he had tears in his eyes as he was talking to me about it, because he said, I've never heard a sermon like that in church. So, I mean, that's pretty significant. And just to balance it out, I also had someone come up to me and say, I think I want to fight with you about this. I think I want to argue with you about this.
Great.
And I said, well, tell me why. And he said, I'm not sure I believe that depression is real. So in the same service that they just experienced, the same sermon, 2 kind of warring and competing ideas exist, which tells me that we're onto something.
Absolutely.
And that, and so we talked a little bit about, just that guy and I talked a little bit about the difference between clinical depression and sort of over-the-counter sadness, and how to distinguish between the two. And we're going to talk in great depth about that next week in the depression series. And again, moms, I'm so sorry that we scheduled the depression topic on Mother's Day. I'm sorry, we didn't plan it that way. So, so what else, guys? What else would you add to the conversation from what we've talked about today? And I don't want to get too deep into depression, anxiety, burnout, because we're going to have specific weeks targeted towards that. But when you guys think about the mental health field and the work that you do, I asked you this question up there, but how do you integrate your Christianity into the work that you do? Like, I think a very elementary way to process what I just said, and I really hope that people don't reduce it to this, but people might say, I heard Fike's sermon, and what I heard was, if I'm mentally unwell, I just need to look to the face of God, and I'll be better. Now, that's not what I intended to say. And by the way, it's really hard to see the face of God. For me, as a pastor, it's really hard to see the face of God. So I don't want to reduce it to that. And I also know that if you're mentally unwell and the synapses aren't communicating well, you can't have a clear thought without some help. So I just want to hear y'all's thoughts on some of that and how it wars with what you're experiencing in your day-to-day life dealing with patients. So either one of you.
Yeah, I think one of the models that I learned in grad school, which incidentally, I went to a Christian grad school, and it really helped me develop a worldview to make sense of these things from with the Bible in hand. But the worldview that I view mental health through is a bio-psycho-social spiritual model.
I love that.
And that says we
Say
have
that again,
to
slow.
bio-psycho-social spiritual model.
And that's like a holistic perspective on not just health, but mental health. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It says any issue that we're looking at, that we're talking about, we have to consider the biological factors, the psychological factors, the social factors, and the spiritual factors. And if we ignore any of them, then we're not likely to find a full resolution to a complex issue. And so as someone who's specifically trained to address the psychological aspect of the issues the person brings into my office, I also have to have my eyes on, but is there something biological happening? And I need to make sure this person maybe needs to have their sleep checked with their doctor, because that could be impacting what looks like depression or a social issue. Perhaps there's something going on in their family that's creating problems that are looking like you were saying today, it's not a me problem. Maybe there's a we problem happening, or they don't have the support. I think, You've talked a lot about our church being a place that shows up and creates community. When we don't have that, we see other symptoms developing that often show up in our offices. And if we don't look at what spiritually may be going on, psychologically, we may be not able to provide a full resolution or answer to what the person's needing. Because again, God is complex. We are too. We're made in his image. And so that's really the lens that I try to look at people in my office through, is what's going on in all of those realms. And how do we ask the right questions, figure out what's going on in those areas, and find people who know how to answer those questions in those areas.
That's amazing. That's amazing. What would you say?
I think one of the things that stuck out to me was towards the beginning of your talk, when you were talking about people feeling like they've got to be all cleaned up and have arrived and to be at church.
Behave in order to belong.
You know. And I think there's a lot of hurting people sitting in our seats on Sunday mornings. And one of my jobs, I used to take teenagers to AA. And the power in that room compared to some of the churches I've been to, because they were able to say, I'm a mess. Here I am. I'm going to surrender. And, as I take one step at a time, and I'm humble and I'm open about my brokenness, there is so much power in that.
And I think that term, that the Christian term is celebrate recovery. I love that. Let's celebrate what God's doing in each of us in the process of doing that. It's powerful.
And I would piggyback. I love that you brought up that model. I'd also say that I think there is such power in truly being seen and heard in our mess. And a lot of times that's what counselors do. It takes a while for people to feel safe with us, but to be able to be honest about what their pain looks like, what their struggle looks like, how they've tried to cope and manage on their own. And sometimes we make a bigger mess out of the ways that we try to cope, not just with substances, but being a perfectionist or being controlling or trying to micromanage people in our family, and so I think, I think part of the healing comes from being seen and heard in that mess. A lot of times I feel like that really challenges shame.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned today, sometimes we try to bring the Bible out and say, here's the answer with this verse, but we forget how many verses, how many books of the Bible are filled with people like David saying, look, I am a mess. I'm weeping. I'm filling my couch with tears. And sometimes it's enough just to make a space where it's safe to say that.
Yeah.
And as a church, I think we could take notes sometimes from places like AA where it's where that can be said, and then you feel welcomed.
Yeah.
You're told you belong.
Yeah. We're doing this summer, we're doing the Psalms all summer. And I've been kind of starting to work on that. And sometimes, I mean, I know it's ridiculous because he's already in heaven, but sometimes I pray for David. I worry about David because David will be like, God, you're amazing. You're my everything. You're the rock of my salvation. You saved me. You changed my life. Kill my enemies. Take them down. And I'm like, are you okay? Like, he's got the spirit of Kendrick Lamar. Like, it's really going down. Like, he hates his enemies. Anyway, so.
In grad school, we would sometimes look at Bible characters and consider how we might have diagnosed them if they had been in the room with us.
Awesome.
There are many diagnosable Bible people.
Right. And I think that's got to be encouraging
Absolutely.
to us, you know, that the Bible's not filled with all these idyllic, perfect characters that never got it wrong. That it's filled with people just like us who are wrestling with our humanity and the intense complexity of our humanity. And it's all there in the pages. And I think that's powerful. So, all right. Well, before we go, I'd love for you guys to just talk to anybody who's watching this that would say, you know what? I have never lifted my hand to say, I need help. I've been trying to fix it on myself. I've Taylor Swifted it. It's me. I'm the problem. You know, maybe they're watching this, and how would you encourage them to pursue a we solution?
That's a great question. I think we live in a culture and a society that says we should be able to have all of the solutions already within us to pull ourselves up, right? That's kind of the generation ahead of us that said, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And we should, but we can should ourselves into a corner sometimes. And if we aren't able and willing to look at what hands God has put around us to help pull us out of that corner, I think we're cutting off the solutions, the answers, the salvation, the healing, the freedom that potentially God is saying is right here for you. You know, I believe Christian counselors exist in the field because God has called us and said, I want you to be available for my children who need you. And so I think when we are afraid to open ourselves up to that possibility, it makes sense because it's scary. Shame tells us, keep ourselves hidden, like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Right.
And the solution to that was not to stay hidden.
Right.
The solution was to say, hey, look, I need some leaves. Who can help me find that? Right. And
we're naked.
Yeah. And sometimes that's what our job looks like. A counselor can come alongside and say, hey, let me put my arm around you. Let's find some leaves and see what's next. And we can laugh a little as we do it. And it's not as scary as it may seem.
You should put that on your business card. I'll help you find some leaves and decide what's next. We'll find a quippier way to say it, but I like that. What would you say?
You should go into PR.
There you go.
I like the saying, it's not a me problem, it's a we problem. I definitely think that we are, we're all connected, and the context and the environments that we are in can impact us. That is all. I'm trying to think of what else to say.
No,
I definitely think a lot of times we think we have to do it ourselves. But I think there's such strength in being able to say, I've tried these different things and I don't know what else to do, you know? And we all have blind spots. We all have defense mechanisms that kind of can cloud our understanding of things. And so being able to sit with someone and kind of just look at what's been happening and being curious and compassionate and saying, okay, I'm willing to experiment and try to do it a different way.
Yeah. The book that really shaped and formed my process of preparing for this sermon is by a guy named Jim Wilder. I quoted him in the sermon. He and a guy named Michael Etheridge wrote a book called The Other Half of Church. Strongly encourage you to read that book if you never have. It talks a lot about the whole right prefrontal cortex. I got it wrong. Right orbital prefrontal cortex. See, after I just bragged about figuring it out. Anyway, he talks a lot about that. And he talks a lot about this idea, and this is what next week is really a lot about, this idea that Christians tend to try to will themselves towards obedience and towards behavioral change. And they go, oh, I'm a Christian now, so I need to change. And we tend to think that that's something I have to do. And I'll just leave this as a teaser for next week. Jesus said this incredible thing. He said, if you love me, you'll obey me. Now, you can read that and go, you know what, if you love me, you'll obey me. And it could be very manipulative and narcissistic. That's not what he meant. What he meant was, dude, if you belong to me, and if we have a relationship and you are being formed by my face and formed by what matters to me, then your life is going to tell the story of obedience. It's going to tell the story of a person who understands not just who you are, but who we are. And that is a powerful answer to the question, what's wrong with me? How do I fix this? So many Christians feel like they can't change the patterns of their life. And it's because they're using the left side of their brain to try to will themselves towards obedience. And it's never going to work. And so it's not to say that spiritual disciplines don't matter, because that's how we see the face of God, is we read the word. Okay, we let the word form us. We spend time with Christians. We see the glory of God emanating off of other Christians. And so those spiritual disciplines matter because they're affecting not just my identity, but our identity. And that, this is the teaser, that is described in the Bible as a word called hesed, H-E-S-E-D. It's a Hebrew word, and I'm going to dig deep into it next week as we talk about depression. We're going to talk about how you know that you're actually clinically depressed versus maybe just sad. The Nuggets lost last night. It would be wrong for me to say that I'm depressed. I'm not depressed. I'm bummed out, and I'm a little angry with Jamal Murray. But I'm not depressed, right? And so learning how, as Christians, how to not be flippant about these words. They really mean something. And so we're going to talk a lot about that next week. And we're also going to wish moms a very happy Mother's Day. So thanks for tuning in. Next week's going to be awesome. You'll hear from Kim Troby, who's a good friend of ours, and also Melissa Janis. She's on our teaching team. And Melissa herself is kind of a survivor. She is living with depression, and she is following after Jesus. And so you'll hear a little bit about her story next week in these chairs. Thanks for tuning in for, I guess we're going to call this thing And Another Thing. So thanks for tuning into And Another Thing. We love you guys. God bless you.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in again today. We want to know, what is your next step? What is the Lord leading you to do next? Would you email us at info@movementchurch.co and just let us know what God is speaking to you, what's stirring in your heart, and how can we participate in that with you? If you'd like to contribute to the Movement Church, and we'd sure appreciate if you did, you can text whatever amount that you'd like to give to the number 84321. And it'll take you through a process and help you to do that. You can find the Movement Church on all the social media platforms, and we would ask that you would give us a follow, stay connected with us so you can be a part of our story. Remember, God is for you, and so are we.